Part 1. Rodgers and Hammerstein. An extremely brief history. The partnership between Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein was one of the most influential partnerships in musical theater history. In 1943, they worked together for the first ever musical production, Oklahoma, by mixing the elements of drama, music, dance, and comedy in a way that had never been done before. They had pioneered the golden age of Broadway. The success of Oklahoma had never been seen before. It ran for over 2,000 performances, and within the first 5 days of the production's first performance, the musical got over $25,000, which was an extremely large amount of money at the time. Later that same year, Rodgers and Hammerstein formed a national tour of Oklahoma. After the success of Oklahoma, Rodgers and Hammerstein went on to write 10 other musicals, including 1 motion picture and 1 TV musical, which is what you're here listening to me talk about right now. So strap in, everybody, as we're going to talk about the 1957 TV musical Cinderella and its subsequent 1997 remake for a decent amount of time. Part 2. Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, 1957. In the 1950s, TV adaptations of musicals were pretty common. Television versions of Broadway shows such as Annie Get Your Gun, Wonderful Town, Anything Goes, and Kiss Me Kate were aired throughout the decade. In 1955, NBC approached Rodgers and Hammerstein to see if they would do something that had never been done before. Write an original, family-oriented musical that was made specifically for television. The duo thought about these criteria and were intrigued. This would be their first jump into television, and they sought out the challenge. Hammerstein stated, "Some people said we stayed out of TV for so long because we didn't like the medium. That isn't true. It was simply a question of finding something exciting to do, and then finding a way to do it." Rodgers and Hammerstein thought about this challenge, and they finally settled on Cinderella. Hammerstein states in his autobiography, "What sold us immediately was the chance to work with Julie. It was right from the start. The deal was that anything that was standard in a Broadway budget, such as casting, costumes, scenery, direction, choreography, writing, and composing, would all be the responsibility of Rodgers and Hammerstein. And anything that was unique to television, such as camera, lights, sound, and advertising, would be the responsibility of CBS." In the Saturday Review, Hammerstein says, "It takes a year to write a Broadway show. It took me 7 months to write the book and lyrics for Cinderella. Deciding who would say what and who would sing what took us a few days. We blueprinted the action and began writing. We want the kids who see it to recognize the story they know. Children can be very critical of that score. Of course, the parents will be watching too. So we've tried to humanize the characters without altering the familiar plot structure. During rehearsals, 56 performers, 33 musicians, 80 stagehands, 4 giant cameras, costumes, sets, and props were crammed into a tiny 4,200-foot space. The actors had to move with caution, and the musicians were put into a tiny room in an attempt to overcome the cramped acoustics. Because so much was riding on this, namely CBS one-upping NBC's production of Peter Pan and over $370,000, the crew had Julie Andrews record 6 songs from the musical, and they sent the recording to news editors and radio stations, and a couple weeks before the air date, the company recorded an original cast album. The team then put the cast and crew through 3 performances that were filmed and analyzed. The first 2 led to changes in costuming, wigs, and line readings, and the third was recorded as a backup just in case the worst happened. Rodgers told TV Guide, "If Julie can't make the show, then neither can we." Finally, the big event arrived, and over 24 million households tuned in. This was roughly an audience of 170 million people, which is the largest in United States history until the 45th Super Bowl in 2011. Dame Julie Andrews recounts,
"More than 107 million people tuned in, television's largest single audience up to that time. Richard Rodgers later determined that it would have taken 110 years of performances for Cinderella to reach that large an audience in a Broadway theater."
Part 3. Cinderella, 1957. My reaction. First, Julie Andrews, fresh off My Fair Lady, is absolutely superb as Cinderella. She delivers her lines and sings her songs absolutely beautifully. It's no wonder she quickly shot to icon status. In fact, 7 years after Cinderella, she starred in the movie adaptation of Rodgers and Hammerstein's The Sound of Music and Walt Disney's Mary Poppins. Edie Adams as the fairy godmother is really good. Even if the baton twirling does date the musical a little bit, she's still fantastic. She's funny, gorgeous, and really embodies the whimsical charm that the fairy godmother embodies. The stepsisters' lament is amazing, and you can't help but feel just a little bit bad for them because they wish the prince could see the beauty in them regardless of their flaws. I also thought it was really amazing that this musical even happened to begin with, given all the constraints. And if you watch it, you can really see the love and the care that went into blocking the action and musical numbers and working around the commercial breaks. Part whatever. 1997 Cinderella. Cinderella, starring Whitney Houston, Brandy, and Bernadette Peters, aired on ABC in 1997, just 8 years before the hit American sitcom How I Met Your Mother. It had a budget of roughly $112 million and was one of the most expensive movie musicals ever produced at the time. This version of Cinderella aired on ABC's Wonderful World of Disney in 1997. Sometime near the beginning of production, Whoopi Goldberg, the actress who played Queen Constantina, found out that she was going to be wearing jewels and said, "I am not wearing that fake shit." She called up her jeweler friend Harry Winston and said, "Listen, I'm playing a queen and I'd like to have some jewels. Can you lend us some?" Her friends over at Harry Winston said they'd pick out some royal jewels and brought over a few $1,000,000 worth. There were so many jewels that just off screen, there were armed guards who worked for Harry Winston just to make sure that every jewel was accounted for after shooting was wrapped for the day. During late-stage production, Disney did the most Disney-like thing possible and started bitching about how much money the musical was taking. In an interview, executive producer Craig Zidane said, "We didn't have enough money for extras for the last day when we were shooting the wedding. The day before, we'd shot in one direction, and on this final day, we'd needed to shoot in the opposite direction. We said to this exec at Disney, 'We need a couple more dollars because we can't afford the extras for the last day.' The executive said, 'You don't need them,' and we said, 'Wait, so you mean the camera's in one direction, and you see all these extras, and then you flip, and you turn the other direction, there's no one there?' Whoopi was pissed. She had an envelope full of cash and had it sent by messenger to the executive's house with a note that said, 'Here's my contribution for the extras for the last day.'"
On guard, bitch.
Whoopi said later in an interview, "I probably did. I'm known for doing shit like that. I don't know how, if you've got a project going on and you know it's the last day, you're gonna start bitching about money." According to the interview, they thought Whoopi's gesture would shame Disney into giving them money up to finish the production. But it didn't, so some of the cast ended up paying for the last few days of production out of pocket. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, this made-for-TV musical broke records and is regarded as one of the most important movies of the 90s. Eric Thompson states in his article, "Cinderella was effortlessly, even unintentionally, progressive. It created a world that was vibrant and modern and multicultural, and it filled that world with magic. It forecasts a world with far more possibility. It's a film made for the future." Part something or other. Why I like it. So, the diverse cast in the 90s was extremely progressive. In fact, the fandom calls this the Rainbow Cinderella, and the way they cast people of all races is fantastic. And in all honesty, this is actually a movie that wouldn't be made today because we'd have jackasses complaining that a black Cinderella is woke and pandering. In fact, we saw this with the remake of The Little Mermaid. The song Falling in Love with Love was written for a musical called The Boys from Syracuse, and in the original context of the musical, it's about someone scolding themselves for the childlike foolishness of believing in anyone. However, this piece was added into Cinderella specifically for Broadway legend Bernadette Peters, because her character of the stepmother didn't have a song, and it really wouldn't make much sense to have such a legend starring in your musical and not even have a song. so it was crammed in the musical. Within the context of Cinderella, it's about how the stepmother married for love and got spurned once, and she's now forever burdened with a broken heart and walls that prevent her from ever loving for love's sake again. She passes this extremely cynical take on romance down to her daughters after Cinderella says, "A person should fall in love with who you are as a person, not their beauty or money." This is powerful and offers insight into the stepmother's psyche, and the 2015 remake of Cinderella borrows from this with Kate Blanchett's stepmother. Her stepmother, much like Bernadette Peters' stepmother, toes the line between evil and cruelty. And, in my opinion, this dynamic addition to Lady Tremaine makes her a more interesting character. Her husband died, and now she's left to fend for herself in a world, much like our own, that doesn't care too fondly for single mothers. We can view her as a reflection of what happens when we allow our personal tragedies and bitterness to shape who we are. From a narrative point of view, we can look at Lady Tremaine as Cinderella's foil. Both are victims of tragedy. Lady Tremaine and Cinderella both lost people who loved them, but one lets that make her jaded and cold, while the other understands that in spite of loss and pain, we should always remain warm and kind. Whitney Houston plays Cinderella's godmother, and she did so good. It's Whitney Houston, of course she did good. Let's be honest here. There's no way she didn't do good. She understood the assignment, and she delivered 100%, and she's all confidence all the time. She's a diva. And from the way she commands the stage and on-screen presence to the way she sings and makes the song she sings her own, she just exudes the warmth that you'd imagine a fairy godmother to have. She was the perfect casting for the fairy godmother, and one of the best moments in the movie is when fairy godmother and Cinderella are singing Impossible. They sing about how anything is possible, and this is the big lesson of the musical. Nothing is impossible, and they sing it's possible over and over and over again until we as an audience believe that anything is possible. Part 6, I guess, is it good actually? So, a movie being good is really extremely subjective, but these are actually the perfect made-for-TV musicals, and in both of them, you can see the love for the musical and the sets and the music and the way not one single person is phoning their performances in. And even given both of these musicals' budget issues, it's amazing they even got made in the first place. And it's one of my favorite musicals, and if you haven't seen it, you can see the 1957 one on YouTube, link in the description, and the 1997 version is on Disney+. In my biased opinion, the 1997 version is the best one. It's an extremely close call, and it boils down to the nuance of the stepmother and the stepsisters. And the king and queen are actually a lot more fleshed out than the 1957 one. However, the 1957 version is also something you should watch at least once. Link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching my first video essay. If you liked what you saw, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. A special thanks goes to the University of Pittsburgh Writing Center for helping me write some of this. And I would like to give a huge thank you to my friends for reading and helping me edit the rest of this.